Imagine playing a game where everyone knows the rules except you. Picture that new employee who accidentally offended the office veteran by sitting in their unassigned usual spot. Embarrassing, but revealing. That's the reality most of us face daily in our professional and social lives. While you're diligently following the official rulebook, others are navigating an invisible system of power dynamics. In the next 20 minutes, I'll reveal what philosophers like Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The unwritten code that governs who rises and who falls. This isn't about manipulation, it's about recognition. Because once you see the invisible chessboard, you can finally make your move with integrity and purpose. The illusion of fairness. Why merit alone never wins. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to advance effortlessly, while others with superior talent struggle to be recognized? This paradox reveals the first hidden rule of power, one that contradicts everything we've been taught about how success works in our society. From childhood, we inherit a comforting narrative about how the world operates. Work hard, develop your talents, follow the rules, and you'll be rewarded accordingly. This belief in meritocracy forms the bedrock of our understanding of success. It promises fairness and justice, a system where excellence is recognized and contribution is valued. Yet when we examine the actual mechanics of advancement in organizations and social hierarchies, a troubling disconnect emerges. The relationship between merit and success proves far weaker than the societal promise suggests. Organizational psychology studies demonstrate that perceived competence frequently overshadows actual competence in determining who advances. Research from Princeton and Stanford consistently reveals that confident mediocrity outperforms modest excellence in professional environments. Machiavelli identified this reality centuries ago, noting that the great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances, as though they were realities. His observation captures a timeless truth about human systems. They operate on perception rather than objective merit, a principle that persists despite our technological and social evolution. Nelson Mandela exemplified strategic understanding of this principle during his imprisonment on Robben Island. He learned Afrikaans as a deliberate power strategy. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head, Mandela explained. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. By mastering his captor's language and cultural references, he gained psychological advantages crucial for later negotiations. He recognized the unwritten rules of influence existing beyond the prison's explicit power structure. The workplace offers countless examples of this principle in action. The naive idealist approaches their career believing excellent work will inevitably be recognized. They focus exclusively on technical skills and deliverables, trusting that merit speaks for itself. Meanwhile, the strategic realist understands that formal organizational charts tell only half the story. They map informal influence networks, identifying who has decision-makers' ears, which relationships carry unstated weight, and how information truly flows through the system. They recognize that official advancement criteria often differ dramatically from the actual determinants of professional ascension. This clarity explains why technically brilliant people remain stuck while those with average abilities rise to leadership. The meritocracy myth keeps talented individuals trapped in an unwinnable game because they focus on the wrong metrics. They optimize for excellence in officially valued but practically overlooked areas while neglecting the unspoken factors that actually determine advancement. Sociologists call this phenomenon institutional decoupling, the gap between an organization's stated values and its actual reward mechanisms. Every system operates with official rules, in mission statements and handbooks, and shadow rules that reveal themselves only through patterns of who succeeds regardless of merit. This matters because talent without strategy becomes frustrated potential. Excellence without understanding the actual game becomes wasted effort. The most talented often remain invisible, not because they lack value, but because they misunderstand how value is recognized within their specific system. The first rule of power thus becomes clear. Systems reward those who understand their actual incentives, not their stated values. Success comes from seeing the unofficial rules clearly, not from ignoring them. This doesn't mean abandoning ethics. Rather, it means developing clarity about how human systems actually function beneath their idealistic veneer. The power paradox: why nice people finish last, and what to do instead. Beyond recognizing hidden systems lies an even more personal challenge: the paradox that your natural, morally justified responses to power dynamics might be your greatest liability. When you feel that surge of righteous indignation at being overlooked or undervalued, you're experiencing the very emotional pattern that signals to others you aren't ready for greater influence. Consider what happens in most workplaces when someone is passed over for promotion. The typical response involves frustration, indignation, and moral outrage. This isn't fair. I've worked harder than anyone. These reactions, while completely understandable, send unmistakable signals throughout the social hierarchy that paradoxically reinforce one's subordinate position. This is what psychologists call the low-status emotional signature. Research from the Harvard Negotiation Project has documented how displays of moral outrage, indignation, and public frustration are unconsciously coded in organizational environments as markers of powerlessness. In everyday scenarios, these emotional displays function as status indicators that others intuitively recognize and respond to. Machiavelli recognized this psychological principle centuries ago when he observed that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. In modern terms, he was acknowledging that people evaluate your power not by your internal feelings or even your competence, but by the emotional signals you display in challenging situations. This creates a profound paradox. The emotions that feel most authentic and morally justified in power situations are precisely the ones that undermine your position further. Studies in behavioral economics have shown that leaders who display frustration or indignation when challenged are rated as significantly less influential than those who maintain emotional equilibrium, even when facing identical situations. Consider Sarah, a marketing director who was repeatedly overlooked for leadership roles despite her expertise. Initially, she responded with visible frustration in meetings. After studying power dynamics, she transformed her approach. When passed over again, instead of expressing indignation, she calmly requested a conversation with decision-makers to understand their perspective. Within 6 months, she was offered a vice president position. This insight brings us to the concept of strategic emotional intelligence, the deliberate management of emotional displays based on their effectiveness rather than simply their authenticity. This doesn't mean suppressing your genuine feelings, but rather choosing when, how, and to whom you express them. Research from the Yale School of Management found that successful negotiators consciously regulate their emotional expressions, displaying firmness without aggression, confidence without arrogance, and resolution without bitterness. They experience the full range of human emotions privately, but make deliberate choices about what emotional signals will advance their position in public. In his autobiography, Franklin reveals his approach to influence. He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged. By requesting small favors rather than offering them, Franklin created what psychologists now call the Ben Franklin effect, wherein the person performing the favor unconsciously justifies it by deciding they must value the requester. The implications are profound. Power requires fundamentally reframing how we process emotional reactions to unfairness. Strategic individuals recognize that emotional self-regulation is not deception, but necessity. They experience their authentic emotions, but make deliberate choices about which emotional expressions serve their ultimate purpose. A study from Columbia Business School tracked 184 executives over 5 years and found that the single strongest predictor of career advancement wasn't technical ability or even social connections. It was emotional equanimity under pressure. The executives who maintained composure during organizational conflicts were promoted at more than twice the rate of those who displayed reactive emotional patterns, regardless of their actual competence. The perception game: creating value through strategic visibility. Emotional intelligence might advance your career, but there's a more unsettling truth about how value operates in professional environments. Consider this paradox. The world's greatest violin performance in an empty room creates no value at all. Like a masterful concerto performed without an audience, the notes, no matter how perfectly executed, dissipate into nothingness without witnesses to appreciate their beauty. Similarly, your work exists in a strange quantum state, simultaneously valuable and worthless until observed by those who matter in your professional ecosystem. This speaks to the fundamental nature of value itself. When identical contributions receive drastically different rewards, we're witnessing the third hidden rule of power at work. Value, contrary to what most of us believe, isn't an inherent quality that resides within your work. It's a perception that exists primarily in the minds of others. This explains why brilliant ideas sometimes disappear without impact, while mediocre concepts championed by skilled communicators reshape entire organizations. The uncomfortable truth is that your contributions, no matter how exceptional, remain essentially invisible until they register in the consciousness of key decision-makers. Machiavelli captured this reality with piercing clarity when he observed that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. This insight transcends his era and speaks directly to our modern professional environments. Consider how many talented professionals pour their energy into perfecting their craft while neglecting how that craft is perceived, understood, and valued by others. These individuals often find themselves puzzled and frustrated when their contributions go unrecognized, while more visible, though perhaps less substantive, work receives accolades and advancement. Research from the University of Chicago reveals what they term attribution asymmetry, where work without witnesses receives significantly less credit. Their 3-year study found that invisible achievements were 58% less likely to appear in performance reviews and 64% less likely to influence promotions, regardless of actual organizational impact. This explains why talented individuals eventually become disengaged, believing the system is rigged against them. What they're missing isn't talent or effort, but strategic visibility. The thoughtful positioning of their contributions, where they create maximum impact without appearing nakedly self-promotional. This isn't about grandstanding or politics. It's about ensuring your work registers in the perception of those who evaluate its worth. To bridge this gap between creation and recognition, successful professionals craft what psychologists call value narratives, coherent stories that contextualize their contributions meaningfully. Rather than assuming their work speaks for itself, they actively translate its significance for their audience, positioning their efforts where they'll be properly perceived. A Northwestern Kellogg school study demonstrates this principle convincingly. Tracking equally talented software engineers over 18 months, researchers found those who dedicated just 15% of their time to strategic communication received performance ratings 37% higher and advancement opportunities at nearly 3 times the rate of their heads-down counterparts, despite producing less actual code. The contrast between approaches is stark. The ineffective approach waits passively to be discovered believing quality alone creates value. The strategic approach recognizes that value requires both creation and translation, helping others understand what truly matters about your contribution. This isn't manipulative, it's communicative. It's ensuring deserved credit isn't lost in translation. Most professionals struggle with this requirement, feeling that highlighting their work seems self-aggrandizing. Yet this hesitation creates a disconnect between their contributions and how those contributions are perceived. Meanwhile, those who master strategic visibility become the most valued because they understand that perception and reality are inseparable in human systems. This leads us to the third rule of power. Value exists only when perceived by those who matter. Your brilliance becomes consequential only when properly witnessed and understood by those who evaluate its worth. This isn't cynical, it's pragmatic. The boundary principle. Setting limits that command respect. Strategic visibility creates value when properly positioned, but now we face a deeper paradox of power. Have you noticed how the most helpful people often command the least respect in professional environments? This seemingly unfair pattern reveals the fourth hidden rule of power, one that challenges our fundamental assumptions about generosity and influence. Most of us are raised with the belief that saying yes, being accommodating, and going the extra mile demonstrates our value and secures our position. Yet psychological research tells a different story. A groundbreaking study from Columbia University tracked helping behaviors across 142 professionals and discovered something counterintuitive. Those who said yes to every request were rated 27% lower in leadership potential than those who selectively declined. Even more striking, the most accommodating professionals were 38% less likely to be considered for promotions despite working longer hours. Every request you receive in a professional context represents a subtle negotiation of status and power. When you automatically accommodate every demand, you're unwittingly communicating that your time, expertise, and priorities are less valuable than others. The human mind processes unlimited availability as a signal of lower status, activating unconscious bias that associates scarcity with value. Machiavelli recognized this psychological principle centuries ago when he observed that men ought either to be well treated or crushed. While his phrasing sounds harsh to modern ears, the underlying insight remains valid. Respect emerges from clear boundaries that define the conditions under which you'll engage. Without these boundaries, you become what organizational psychologists call a psychological resource, someone whose primary value is serving others' agendas rather than advancing meaningful objectives. The most successful professionals practice what behavioral scientists call respectful limitation, the art of declining requests firmly while preserving relationships and actually enhancing respect. This isn't about becoming difficult or unavailable, but rather establishing parameters around how and when you deploy your talents. Harvard Business School researchers documented this in their Paradox of Generosity study, finding that strategic helpfulness increased influence by 42%, while indiscriminate helpfulness reduced it by 22%. Consider Eleanor Roosevelt, who began her public life painfully eager to please everyone. By her own admission, she wanted to be liked and feared criticism. Yet as she evolved into one of history's most influential first ladies, she established kind but unwavering boundaries. When faced with endless demands, she famously developed the principle, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent," a practical strategy for maintaining boundaries that preserved her effectiveness. The difference between effective and ineffective boundary setting is clear. Ineffective professionals typically over-explain, "I have 3 meetings, then lunch, plus I didn't sleep well," while effective boundary setters employ principled declining, brief statements referencing consistent standards. "I maintain focused work blocks on Tuesday mornings," carries more authority than "I don't think I can make it work." A University of California study tracking these approaches found professionals who declined requests by referencing consistent principles were rated 34% higher in perceived competence and 28% higher in leadership qualities than those offering elaborate justifications. More remarkably, their relationships actually improved after setting boundaries. Counterintuitively, proper boundaries don't weaken professional relationships. They strengthen them by creating clarity and mutual respect upon which genuine collaboration depends. When people understand where you stand, they develop greater confidence in your word and commitments. The inconsistent helper who reluctantly says yes, only to deliver late damages, trust far more than the principled professional who offers a clear no when appropriate. The resilience factor, transforming opposition into opportunity. Beyond the clarity that boundaries provide lies an even more sophisticated dimension of power dynamics: the strategic handling of direct opposition. What separates true masters of influence from mere position holders isn't how they exercise authority when things go smoothly, but how they respond when their power faces its greatest tests. Consider Abraham Lincoln's remarkable approach to opposition. When assembling his cabinet after winning the presidency, Lincoln made the extraordinary decision to include his fiercest political rivals, men who had publicly ridiculed him and opposed his candidacy. William Seward, Salmon Chase, and Edward Bates had all been his competitors for the Republican nomination, and all joined his team of rivals. When questioned about this unconventional strategy, Lincoln reportedly replied, "Am I not destroying my enemies when I make them my friends?" Most people react to opposition in ways that undermine their position. When challenged directly, our natural impulses drive us toward defensiveness, excessive justification, or retreat. Watch carefully the next time someone's idea is criticized in a meeting. You'll witness these reactions that broadcast weakness in the language of power. High-status individuals respond differently to these same challenges. A study from Princeton's Department of Psychology analyzed confrontational interactions across organizational hierarchies and found that those with established power responded to criticism with significantly greater cognitive flexibility, much like a skilled martial artist who redirects an opponent's force rather than meeting it head-on. Rather than defending their original position, they incorporated opposing viewpoints selectively, strengthening their influence. The researchers termed this capacity integrative response, the ability to absorb opposition without being consumed by it. This aligns with Machiavelli's counsel that a prince ought to have no other aim or thought than war and its rules and discipline. This perspective wasn't advocating for constant conflict, but psychological preparation for the inevitable tests of power. The successful leader anticipates opposition as a natural component of influence rather than an unexpected crisis. What Lincoln understood intuitively was what modern research confirms. Opposition, properly framed, becomes a resource rather than a liability. By incorporating his rivals into his administration, Lincoln gained access to diverse perspectives while neutralizing external criticism. He transformed potential adversaries into stakeholders in his success, strategic resilience at the highest level. Contemporary research from UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business examined how executives respond to direct challenges to their authority. The study revealed that the most influential leaders demonstrated oppositional integration. They treated opposition as valuable market research on their ideas. This approach allowed them to strengthen their positions by addressing genuine weaknesses while demonstrating confidence through engagement rather than avoidance. The contrast between effective and ineffective responses is revealing. Those who respond with defensive justification signal lack of confidence. Those who withdraw surrender their influence entirely. Those who overreact with hostility reveal fundamental insecurity. All three responses diminish power. The alternative approach employed by skilled power players involves three key elements: calm acknowledgement, selective integration, and strategic reframing. They treat opposition as information, maintain emotional equilibrium, and carefully select which elements of criticism merit response. Most importantly, they reframe opposition as an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities rather than defend limitations. This capacity to transform resistance into opportunity represents perhaps the most sophisticated power move of all. The masters of power understand that opposition is inevitable, but their response to it is entirely optional. The fifth rule of power thus emerges: opposition is opportunity when properly framed. Your influence grows not by eliminating resistance, but by strategically incorporating it. The truly powerful are strengthened by challenges, transforming what would break others into the very foundation of their influence. The ethical strategist, wielding power with integrity. While resistance strengthens those who possess power, a question haunts the thoughtful individual. Can one wield these strategic principles without corrupting one's soul in the process? The tension between effectiveness and ethics has misled many to believe they must choose between power and principle. But this fundamental dichotomy is itself an illusion constructed by those who misunderstand Machiavelli's true legacy. History reveals two problematic approaches to power: moral absolutists who refuse to engage with strategic realities while watching their noble causes fail, and pure pragmatists whose short-term victories eventually collapse under eroded trust. Between these extremes lies the path of the ethical strategist, one who understands power's mechanics without surrendering to its corrupting potential. Machiavelli himself has been profoundly misunderstood. His work represents an unflinching observation of how power actually functions, not advocacy for amorality. Research from Warwick University's Political Theory Department shows that Machiavelli's contribution was documenting governance realities without comforting illusions. As historian Erica Benner argues, Machiavelli was giving us a warning about power, not a handbook for tyrants. This historical understanding leads us to ethical strategy, the deliberate application of power principles toward morally worthy ends. Harvard's Center for Public Leadership's 10-year study found that effective, ethical leaders distinguish between power's mechanics, morally neutral, and power's purpose, which can be virtuous or corrupt. The study's director observed, "These leaders understood that strategic thinking isn't inherently manipulative. It's simply clear-eyed. The moral dimension emerges in the ends toward which they direct influence." Consider how Ruth Bader Ginsburg exemplified this balance through what Harvard researchers termed principled pragmatism. She masterfully employed strategic patience, carefully selecting battles and language while maintaining unwavering commitment to equality under law, demonstrating how tactical wisdom can align with ethical boundaries. This principled approach continues with modern leaders. When responding to the Christchurch massacre, New Zealand's former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern strategically framed her message to exclude only those who commit violence while embracing all peaceful citizens. Oxford's Department of Political Ethics Analysis revealed the power of this approach. Ardern demonstrated that emotional intelligence, careful message framing, and strategic boundary setting can serve deeply ethical purposes when guided by clear moral principles. Imagine a workplace scenario where a manager faces pressure to withhold negative data from stakeholders. The ethical strategist would recognize the short-term benefits of concealment, but understand that transparency, strategically communicated with appropriate context and recommendations, builds enduring trust while addressing the immediate issue. This represents power principles applied with moral boundaries intact. What marks the boundary between manipulation and ethical strategy? Stanford's Ethics Center research identified a clear dividing line. Manipulative applications of power conceal their mechanics and self-serving motivations, while ethical applications maintain transparency about methods and aim toward collective benefit. This research forms an integrated framework uniting power principles under ethical guidance. Understand systems' actual incentives without cynicism. Practice emotional self-regulation to remain effective while serving worthy goals. Make your value visible to maximize positive impact. Maintain boundaries to sustain your capacity to serve, and transform opposition into opportunity to create robust solutions. The Stanford researchers found that leaders integrating these principles while maintaining ethical guardrails created virtuous influence spirals, expanding circles of positive impact, elevating entire organizations rather than merely advancing individual careers. The essence becomes clear. Strategic thinking without ethics devolves into manipulation. Ethics without strategy remains ineffectual. True power manifests when you apply these principles toward worthy ends with clear moral boundaries. The ethical strategist harnesses power's realities in service of something greater than self-advancement. We've traveled through the labyrinth of power dynamics together, and perhaps the most profound revelation is this. Power isn't a game of manipulation, but a practice of perception. The masters of influence don't distort reality. They see it with unusual clarity, distinguishing between official narratives and the actual mechanics of human systems. The invitation isn't to abandon your principles, but to become equally sophisticated in how you advance them. There's a vulnerability in moral simplicity when navigating complex systems, a naivety that leaves good people ineffective despite their talents. Machiavelli would recognize that human nature remains constant while our institutions evolve. His wisdom balanced pragmatism with ethics, understanding that what ought to be must harmonize with what is. On this chessboard of influence, will you play as a pawn of circumstance or a strategist of change? See you in the next video.